This week, we speak with Dave Ferguson from Qualys. In the news segment, we have bugs and buffers and paths, our favorite. More money spent on bounties, more security in the CI/CD pipeline, more thoughts on the end of passwords, and more. Stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. Make sure your team is prepared to fight off the latest cybersecurity threat. IT Pro TV is the resource to keep you and your IT team skills up to date. You can stream IT Pro TV courses live and on demand, so there's no need to send staff to off-site training. Team subscriptions include Pro Portal, so managers have full control over your team's training schedule. Go to itpro.tv/ASW and use the code ASW30 to try it free for 7 days and receive 30% off your monthly membership. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW.
Welcome to Application Security Weekly. This is episode 89, recorded December 16th, 2019. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with Matt Alderman. Hey, Matt.
Good morning. Happy Monday.
Good morning and happy Monday. And we also have John Kinsella with us once again, although I think at the moment he's demonstrating a time of check, time of use race condition against traffic. And he'll be joining us shortly. Speaking of join us at InfoSec World 2020, March 30th through April 1st, 2020 at the Disney Contemporary Resort. Security Weekly listeners save 15% off the InfoSec World Main Conference or World Pass. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW2020 and click the register button to register with our discount code. We're currently running our annual listener feedback survey. Please visit securityweekly.com, click the survey tab, and select 2019 Listener Survey to submit your responses. Dave Ferguson is Director of Product Management for Web Application Security at Qualys. After writing code and developing applications for over a decade, Dave transitioned to focus on application security. Prior to Qualys, he led the global application security program at Sabre Corporation and worked as a principal consultant at Fishnet Security, now Optiv. Dave is the author of the OWASP Forgot Password Cheat Sheet and holds CISSP and CSSLP certifications. Hi, Dave. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Mike. Glad to be here. Thanks for letting me join the show here.
Yeah, this sounds like we'll have a great time. I'd love to dive in and start talking a little bit about application security and APIs. But first, your background, started out as writing and developing applications before you came into security. And, I was wondering if we could chat a little bit about that and figure out what brought you into security, because that's one of those underlying themes when we talk about DevOps and DevSecOps is how to get developers exposed to and even interested into security so they become experts like yourself.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I mean, I came into my career as an engineer and ended up doing a lot of programming, decided I liked the programming aspect better. So kind of switched gears and decided I wanted to focus on that and became a web developer, wrote web applications for many years, late 1900s, early 2000s. And about around 2004, I started to see things like SQL injection. I heard about OWASP and it really piqued my interest. And so started digging into that a little bit, decided I wanted to actually make that my career in terms of transitioning to application security. So I kind of started my career in 2006 as a consultant with Fishnet, pen testing applications. I did that for many years. And interesting, that first year in security, I was also at home kind of just using some websites that I visit regularly. And one of them was Netflix. At the time, it was DVD by mail, rental service, basically. And happened to notice some problems, not looking for anything, but I just learned about a vulnerability called cross-site request forgery, and noticed that the Netflix website at the time was just full of CSRF vulnerabilities, essentially no protection at all against that particular issue. And today Netflix has a world-class AppSec team. I mean, they're very well known actually, but in 2006, not so much. So I actually found someone at Netflix that would kind of listen to me as somebody who stumbled on these vulnerabilities, because you could do some pretty nasty things. I mean, with a CSRF attack, you could add movies to another user's rental queue. You could change the shipping address on their account, so you could get the DVDs delivered to yourself. You could change their password on their account to take over their account. Really nasty things. So anyway, I found someone at Netflix. They got those CSRF vulnerabilities fixed, and actually, as CSRF, through awareness and frameworks, built-in protection mechanisms, CSRFs have pretty much been quashed at this point. It's dropped off the OAuth top 10. But at the time, that was kind of my first kind of impact in the application security world, is telling Netflix there was such a thing as a vulnerability called cross-site request forgery.
So, Dave, I'm curious. A quick question on the kind of the skill set component of this, right? You were developing web apps, and how does that skill set then help you when it went into penetration testing? I mean, is it an easy transition for a developer? I used to code a long, long time ago. I haven't done it in ages, so my skill set's way too rusty to have any relevancy here. But I'm just curious, from a typical development standpoint, as you move from a developer into maybe pen testing applications, how applicable is that skill set, and how easy is that transition?
For me, it was very natural. I took to pen testing like a fish to water. And having developed web apps, that gave me the foundation of that technical knowledge about how web apps are developed, how they're built, how they're put together. And being able to then find security issues in those web apps ended up being a pretty easy transition. And we found that throughout my career at Fishnet, when we were trying to hire consultants, we would actually look for developers and take them and teach them the application security component. I mean, as long as they had an interest in it. If they didn't have an interest in security, then forget about it. But if they had that interest and they had the development background, they seemed to make the best pen testing application pen testers. Whereas taking a network security person or a network kind of person with that background didn't translate as well into application pen testing.
That's sort of similar to what I'm seeing nowadays with machine learning. It seems easier to take people who have the security set and get them to understand the math than to get a mathematician and get them to understand the security. So it's, I guess, a little backward from what you're saying with Dave, but that seems where it's going in the last few years.
Yeah, it's having that foundational technical knowledge about whatever domain it is. So I see similar thing in cloud security. So I think it's probably better to take someone with great knowledge, like with maybe a bunch of AWS certs and really knowledgeable in that area, and then teaching them the aspects of cloud security and where the security issues could occur there. So it's all kind of related.
And I think we have kind of an example of that in terms of having developers, and teaching them security, is when you were talking about the CSRF attacks in Netflix. That CSRF tends to be one of the, unfortunately, possibly few or not as many as we need, success stories within application security, in the sense that developers have built in at the framework level a lot of countermeasures for it. So we don't really have to worry about CSRF as much anymore. Whereas SQL injection and cross-site scripting are still out there as well, although perhaps cross-site scripting is on its way out as more people adopt frameworks like React, something like that. But that is a lot of, Dave, coming from manually writing code. I guess, we can't automatically write code, but doing manual penetration testing. But you're also now getting to the point where you're automating this and working with a lot of tools to do this automation. So what was that, for as much as Matt's question was about that transition from developer and getting in pen testing, What does that transition look like going from doing the manual pen testing and figuring out what can be automated well, and perhaps what is going to stay within the realm of people hacking, hacking apps manually?
Yeah, my great question, because that's my current job at Qualys is to essentially figure out how to automate the testing for the vulnerabilities, whatever it happens to be. And there's some things that scanners, can do very well, and there's others that are more challenging. A challenging one would be something like an insecure direct object reference or an authorization flaw, where a human with a brain can quickly see that, I changed an ID here in this URL and I got someone else's data that I shouldn't be able to see. Really pretty easy to find from a human standpoint, but from an automated scanner standpoint, a little bit more difficult, because the scanner doesn't necessarily have the context of the data and know that the response that just came back is not for the data that I'm logged in as. So that's one aspect that's challenging. Another one would be something like some of the out of band vulnerability that are currently you're hearing about a lot. For example, the Capital One breach that happened earlier this year. One component of that was the server-side request forgery. Kind of a cousin to the cross-site request forgery, but server-side request forgery has not been quashed at all. In fact, we're hearing more and more about these out-of-band type vulnerabilities. Out-of-band meaning you are unable to detect the vulnerability with just a simple request and response type of scenario. So you can make a request, but the response has no evidence of the vulnerability. So, whereas from a scanner standpoint, you need some other way to solve that. So that's one of the things that my team here at Qualys has been looking at.
Yeah, and you have these really interesting interdependencies between the application and the infrastructure that the application's running on, right? And one of the things, because we're a number of us have a lot of experience with Qualys, because Mike and I are former Qualys. He built part of the product set that I think you product manage today. But I mean, the correlation between the application, the infrastructure that's underneath, and understanding the contextual aspects of that to look for these out of band or interesting vulnerabilities is a challenge, I think, in the industry. I think Qualys has a lot of the capabilities. I'm just curious how you're trying to solve aspects of bringing all that context together.
Yeah, it's kind of a balance between what are our customer base asking for on our web app scanning product, which is the one we're talking about here. So the Qualys WAS product is, it's been around, and Mike knows this very well, for just about 10 years now. And so it's evolved over time to address some of those vulnerabilities that have been becoming more commonplace. And the context is very important. So with a web application that's being scanned, if there's an out-of-band vulnerability, things like SMTP injection, server-side request forgery I mentioned, blind XXE, you have to think a different way. And so what we've done at Qualys, or the way we've kind of approached that, is to develop a DNS service that's being deployed as part of our platform that we call this Qualys Periscope. That's kind of the name we've given it, because it allows us to see vulnerabilities we couldn't see normally with a typical request and response. But with the out-of-band stuff, typically the vulnerable application that you're scanning is almost a proxy to the attack. So the vulnerable application is typically going to embed user supplied data in some sort of server-side request to maybe a third application, an internal application, or even an AWS service that maybe only that application should have access to. But if there's a vulnerability, the application can allow for that attack to happen. So the attacker can use the vulnerable application as a proxy. And the way that it can be detected is with a DNS query. So if the vulnerable application is actually making a request to some internal application or an AWS service, it has to first resolve any FQDN to an IP. And so if we control the DNS server for that domain, we can actually see the DNS request come in. So then we can flag that as a vulnerability. So it's because embedded within that DNS request is some data that tells us which scan it is that actually this came from, and then we can flag that in the scan report as a vulnerability.
Interesting. And that's new capability that's been added into the web app scanning product.
Yeah, actually, it's rolling out now. Qualys has 8 shared platforms around the globe, and we're rolling it out in phases. Right now, it's on two of the 8 pods, but we're platforms. So we're in progress of rolling out that new capability, and we're going to be doing a blog post around that and some other interesting things. So it's really a neat capability.
I think that also speaks to there's an implied aspect to that you should, for scanning production systems. I mean, especially for going back to use, talk about Capital One as the example, because what you've been describing too is the importance of the context of the environment this vulnerable application is sitting around. So if it's on a development network or a staging network, that may not have the exact same context around it in terms of the other SMTP systems or how SSRF might be exploitable in different manners because of other services running on that production system. So that just came to my mind as you were describing that, and I thought that was one of those interesting things. And I guess to turn that into a question, do you see much of that type of resistance or consideration when you talk to customers about whether to run a scanner against production systems, or they're only comfortable running against staging or development systems?
We see across the board customers doing different things. We have some customers that only want to scan their external surface area, just so they set it up as more of a monitoring to they may have other systems in place earlier in the SDLC to do that testing and eliminate vulnerabilities, but they want something that's just testing everything globally from an external perspective and production perspective on a daily or weekly basis. So we see that, but we see other customers that are really interested in getting the testing done earlier in the SDLC, and using our Jenkins plugin to automate the scans in a CI/CD pipeline or whatever it is. And so I think all that is really important, and we want to provide a tool that's flexible enough to provide whatever is needed for the customer needs. So that's kind of the way we've approached that. One thing, of course, we do often have to tell customers, since they may not be really familiar with DAS scanning, or the person running the scan, given the responsibility to run the scans, may not actually know a lot about web app scanning. We're always telling customers, please do not scan a production web application with admin credentials. Believe it or not, we still get customers doing that, and bad things can happen, not because the scanner is doing anything wrong, but just because the scanner is doing what it's designed to do, which is find and exercise all of the functionality and test all of the functionality that it finds. And so if it finds an application, and then inside that application is a button that says delete all records, then the scanner is going to click that button, and that would be bad in a production environment.
But that's funny at the same time, because that's and I agree with you, not something someone should do, but that's sort of one of those relative basis of AppSec is keep your admin interface separate from your customer interface. So it's a hard way for them to learn that lesson, but I don't know.
Yeah, it still happens occasionally, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, good way to learn a lesson in data backups as well, and restoration.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
By the way, that allows us to talk about other Qualys service that we're bringing out: backup and restore. No.
Yeah. It covers the whole recovery domain. We're not going to go there right now.
Well, Dave, you were talking about you talked about earlier how like CSRF has fallen off the OWASP top 10, and just now you've been highlighting these out of band attacks that perhaps we'll see more of, because they're also pretty, obviously consequential, because we're talking about Capital One as a good example right there, but also you were describing why and how they're pretty difficult to detect. So you need some more infrastructure to be able to manage the detection of that, and some intelligence to be able to tie, here's a request that came from the scanner, how does that fingerprint match a DNS lookup that's happening asynchronously? I'm curious, how much do you see that growing in other, SSRF continuing to grow, or are there other types of vulnerabilities that you are imagining in 2020 since we're coming to the end of the year, looking forward? Are there certain things you're either looking forward to in terms of checks and new detections that you're releasing, or trends that you've seen or things that you're worried about in terms of application security focusing on new types of vulnerabilities?
Yeah, I think the number one that comes to mind would be the API security aspect. In other words, we're seeing more and more REST APIs and the need to, and security teams getting a request to scan or test those APIs for vulnerabilities. As probably everybody knows, OWASP has just released a release candidate version of the API Security Top 10. So that kind of just gives you an indication of the importance that APIs, the rise of the API importance. In fact, one statistic that shocked me when I was preparing for a talk earlier this year was that Akamai did a study, and in their CDN network, they say 83% of the web traffic is API traffic, which really shocked me. So it's a combination of things, but it's the popularity of microservice architectures now. Obviously, mobile apps talk to APIs on the back end. So and you're seeing breaches, right? You're seeing, Venmo, Uber, Panera Bread, for just to name a few examples where APIs have been breached. So API security is something that we're focusing on for Qualys, at least for the WAS product. And being able to expand the capability for testing around APIs, just because many of the vulnerabilities are the same as web apps, but again, they have some special considerations for APIs. So that's one of the main areas.
Yeah, and I think one of the big challenges with API security is just knowing which APIs are out there, whether they're public facing, private facing, that whole discovery and inventory of APIs. Because again, developers are off coding an application, they create an API endpoint, but the security team may not know that thing even exists, so they don't even know what to test.
Absolutely, Matt. So security teams who are typically the ones running the Qualys tools and managing those products, they're not in the loop when a development team builds an API and deploys it internally or even externally sometimes. So the discovery piece is really important, and there's other teams at Qualys kind of trying to address that with our passive sensor technology and those kind of things. But knowing what you have and being able to discover it, you can't test it without that.
And then if I do know that it's there, which is step one, right? I have the inventory. Then will WAS do a normal set of tests, or is there something different about the web app scanner at Qualys specific to APIs, or is it identical when you think about scanning FQDN?
Yeah, great question. So the scanning engine is the same, but the setup is going to be different. So the biggest difference, of course, between APIs and web app is your web app, it's a browser-based application. So you can load a URL and a browser engine, and you can start crawling from there. You can follow the links, you can submit the forms, you can do that automated crawling. With an API, not so much. You have to tell the scanner some information about how do you invoke these APIs? What do the endpoints look like? And our product does that a number of different ways. You can provide a proxy capture where you've invoked the APIs through some client. But that's a little bit more work. The better way is the support for Swagger or Open API files. So if developers have a Swagger file that defines their API endpoints, you can just give that to WAS and it'll know how to do the scan. And the newest, probably best way to get your APIs scanned in our product is with providing a Postman Collection. So Postman is super popular tool for testing APIs, functional testing of APIs. But there's a particular option in Postman. You can save a Postman collection, which not only just saves all of the information about your API endpoints, but it also allows for things like workflows. So if you have one API call where the output of that is used in a second API call, then that workflow can be captured in the Postman collection. So, and then the web app scanning engine understands that Postman collection and can follow that workflow and to get a better test of the APIs as far as vulnerabilities goes.
Got it.
It's funny.
You guys have enough of those APIs internally, right? I need to authenticate, get my token, pass my token into the next one to grab, some data. So having the ability to pass results from one API into another is pretty important when you think about the steps, even at the Qualys APIs, because I remember, working with a lot of our clients back in the day on those different steps you needed to even leverage the APIs within the Qualys platform.
Yeah, and we're actually working on breaking out the API testing separate from the WAS product, and we're working on a new product called API Security. Really clever, but it's going to incorporate not only the vulnerability testing of the APIs that we do today in WAS, but it's also going to combine some technology from our partner 42Crunch. 42Crunch is a small API security focused company, and they have some technology that we're going to be bundling with the vulnerability scanning that we do into a new product called API Security.
We know the 42Crunch guys. We've actually interviewed them on the show earlier this year.
Excellent. Really sharp people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was music to my ears was when you were describing that Postman Collection, because I think that, again, to just really emphasize your point, when I was diving into the scanning aspect, every time we would hit an API, it's a bit of a black box because we don't have all the HTML and links from the browser to hint that here's a workflow, or maybe you should click this and then click this, or here's a sequence of links. And that's really what, if there's any theme that's emerging from this particular segment, is that idea of context. That context of what are the systems around your web application so that its SSRF could be leveraged more effectively or be more impactful. And here within APIs, what is the actual workflow that you would go through? Because there's a big difference between just doing a unit test for one particular endpoint versus a functional test, or say, go to this endpoint, set up this relationship with the app, then authenticate, then basically walk through like a checkout, put a widget into your cart, checkout, apply a coupon, and so on. And just knowing how to do that sequence, and then applying a lot of the automated scanning, a lot of the automated testing, is a really compelling story that can, from an automated perspective, can just save humans a lot of time when you can do it effectively.
Yeah, we're really excited about this Postman Collection support. We're the only DAS tool on the market today that actually supports the full execution of a Postman Collection. And the way I've been describing it to our customers who are familiar with WAS, WAS uses Selenium scripts for capturing that workflow in a web application. A Postman Collection allows you to do a similar type of thing in an API. So really useful and very powerful, because if you don't have that workflow, your testing and scanning of the API may not be valid, because if you're not providing the proper token or proper ID for a particular API endpoint, then it may return an error and you're not actually testing for vulnerabilities. And the other thing we're excited about is the combination of the out-of-band detections that I talked about earlier, like the SSRF, with the API testing. Because certainly you can have an API with a server-side request forgery vulnerability. So the combination of the two is just going to provide better detection capability for our customers.
So then what about looking at talking about the OWASP API security top 10, what looks like it particularly challenging for you, or is there one that you're really eager to dive into from an automation perspective?
Yes, we're actually really eager to dive into number one on the list, which is broken object level authorization, or BOLA. So this is kind of the analogous, actually it's the same vulnerability as IDOR in the OWASP top 10 insecure direct object reference. It's just the API security top 10 has chosen to call it broken object level authorization, or BOLA. So it goes back to making a call, changing some value, allowing you to get to another person's data, or data that shouldn't be allowed to get. It's an authorization flaw, so that one, again, we're looking at how to do that in an automated way. Again, it's pretty easy for a human to find that type of thing, but that's not what we're trying to do. So we have looking at different options, including, being able to provide the scanner different credentials that have different levels of access, and then running tests against the API with one set of credentials versus the other, and seeing the differences and trying to, in an automated way, identify those that BOLA vulnerability.
Very cool. And yeah, it's too bad they couldn't stick an E in there, and then it could be Ebola, and that's one of the scariest things for APIs.
I hadn't thought about that, but might get more attention that way.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's interesting. Sorry, I was just going to mention that actually 3 of the top 10 in the API top 10 are identical to the regular top 10. So you got injection, you got security misconfiguration, and you've got the one about insufficient logging and monitoring.
And despite that overlap, there's a lot of things that are, as you've been talking about, that are more distinct or perhaps more specific or unique to the APIs themselves, which I think overall is a good thing, because we're separating, we as the DevOps community, separating front end and back end into more better designs, better architectures. But I don't have a good transition there. But Dave, I did want to ask you, looking up to the new year, anything of particular interest that you want to highlight, where you'll be, what you're working on, or something that we can look forward to from you?
Well, January, I'll be taking a European tour because we have 3 Qualys security conferences happening in Europe. Certainly, I have a session at each of those. One's in London and Munich, and then Paris in the mid part of January. So I'll be talking about the things that I talked about here today in that talk. And then we also have San Francisco Qualys Security Conference coming up. So it's around RSA time. So that's kind of where I'm focused right now. And then just, executing on these different capabilities that I've talked about today. So that's where I'll be focused.
Excellent. Well, I'm not sure I'll be able to make my way out to London, Paris, or Munich, even though I'd love to. But when you hit San Francisco, definitely come by and say hi.
For sure.
And also want to say thank you for joining us today. I want to thank Matt and John as well. This was a great conversation.
Thank you for having me.
And we look forward to hearing more from you. And we also look forward to having all of our listeners, join us for the next segment. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to return with News of the Week.